As we approach April, and it is tomorrow, national insurance is set to rise by 1.25%, which actually in reality is about a 10% increase, helping the economy recover after the pandemic. But it means, of course, paying extra on your monthly wage, hundreds of pounds for the average taxpayer. Does it come at the worst possible time as the cost of living increases and our energy bills soar? But from July, the point at which people do stop paying that national insurance tax will increase to £12,570. But could the government be doing more? Well, joining me now to discuss all of this is Joe Ventry. He's the digital campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. A very good morning to you, Joe. I suppose this comes down to a big debate within the Treasury. Something the Chancellor would suggest is that we have to increase taxes because we're increasing spending and we're having to pay down a debt. The worst thing we could do right now is borrow more money.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Darren. Yeah, you're absolutely right about this debate in the Treasury. The line that we keep hearing from the Treasury is basically that we've got this binary choice. It's either that we raise taxes or we borrow money. But of course, we know that simply isn't the case. The reality is that billions upon billions of pounds of taxpayers' money is wasted every year. And I think a much fairer and more logical approach would be to tackle that waste and ensure that those funds are directed to frontline services like our healthcare service. I mean, if anything, this crisis really should have been a catalyst for the government to seek out those sorts of savings. And, in fairness, we are hearing good things now from the Cabinet Office with their new efficiency drive, and they aim to, deliver £5.5 billion worth of savings. But I think this really does need to go a lot further. I mean, the reality is that households across the country are now having to make savings to make ends meet. And I think it's only right that the government adopts the same approach before tapping up taxpayers yet again.
But in saying that, you talk about savings, but in reality, I mean, there's only so much fat you can trim before you start hitting the bone, i.e. savings are another way of saying cuts. And isn't that the point? Is the public in some ways wants to have its cake and eat it, in that it doesn't want taxes to go up, but it does want increased public spending, particularly in the area of health?
Well, it's quite logical that you would want more spending on frontline healthcare services. But I would say that there is definitely fat left to trim. And, people are well aware of this. I mean, you may have seen recently the NHS employing people on, huge salaries for diversity and inclusion roles. I'd say, most taxpayers would see that as very tangential to their needs from the healthcare service. But, I think there are other avenues to look at as well. I mean, embracing innovation and sort of ramping up those sorts of efficiencies would certainly be one avenue to look at. I mean, there's this supposed £12 billion a year hole that the government is looking to fill in the health and social care funding. And so I think the question that we can ask there is, how can we meet that figure without tax rises? And I mean, when TPA Research looked at this a couple of years ago, what we found was that more, automation in the healthcare service and in the social care sector, you could save up to £18.5 billion a year. And I think that's really the sort of radical thinking that we need to be considering in terms of how we leave taxpayers with more money in their pockets whilst delivering on those essential services.
The only thing I would say to that, Joe, is that, that is something at the very least that is probably going to take years, certainly months and months to try and sort out. It's not going to be done quickly, but people would argue they need help now, and they need more help now. And that means in the short term, don't you think in the end the government politically is just going to have to do more?
They definitely need to do more, and that's certainly the case. But, as you mentioned there, Darren, we are in the midst of a cost of living crisis. I think, as you mentioned at the start there, on the face of it, this is a 1.25% increase, but that figure does really mask how significant of an increase this is. I mean, if you take a person earning £20,000 a year, they're going to see their national insurance payments increase by £130. That's no small amount of money for a lot of people in this country. And I think that would be bad enough in and of itself. But when you think of everything else that taxpayers are contending with this year, like surging energy prices, rising inflation, upcoming council tax rises, it really is no understatement to call this a cost of living crisis.
OK, Joe Ventry, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us there from the Taxpayers Alliance.